light in the limelight. I'm Linda Ugolo, a speaking confidence coach. I want you to feel comfortable to speak in all your limelight moments. And with me today is my guest, Julie Ellis, who I just met this year, and I'm so excited to have her on. She's one of these amazing people who have done so many big things in her life. Like she co-founded Mabel's Labels, an 8-figure business, and sold it to Avery Labels. She won the Canadian Women Entrepreneur of the Year Award. She wrote a must-read book called Big Gorgeous Goals. And she also chaired the board for the Angel One Investors Network. And today, what she's doing these days is she is mentoring female-founded companies who want to move from 7 to 8 figures, which also ties into her podcast called, what is it called, Julie?
It's called Figure 8.
Figure 8. So welcome, Julie.
Thank you so much, Linda. I'm so glad that our paths crossed this year and that we decided to do this today.
Yes, it was one of these things where we were hanging at this author's retreat. We didn't know each other. And, you have a conversation and your interest gets piqued and it leads to something else and it leads to something else. And then I thought, oh my God, I have to have you on the podcast because, I love having people here who can really shine a light on how we can grow in our confidence in different ways. And I feel like you've got skills way beyond mine in a whole other area. And I want people to, I want to be helped by them, first of all. And I want to share what I learn with other people. So thank you for coming on. And what I particularly wanted to start off with, so one of the things that really captured my interest is this idea of leaders having 2 hats and having to navigate that. Can you speak about that?
Well, I think that it's this place where, you start out as a doer and you are, doing all the things and you're driven and you're successful and then, you get promoted. And if you leave on that same hat and that same viewpoint as a leader, you will not actualize in the way that you need to because you're still trying to do everything yourself. You're still trying to be the expert instead of, how do you cultivate the expert? How do you find the you of 5 years ago and want them on your team so that they can become the next leader? And that's a really different place, I think. And it's a different hat to wear as we think about being leaders, and putting on those hats can be a way of almost compartmentalizing things for ourselves. Like, okay, if I was a leader and I'm wearing my hat as the person who's heading up this team and shepherding it forward, what would I do differently than if I was a critical key expert on the team and I had a specific role to play in contributing to that team's success? I think that can just be a really clean way of seeing how it's different. And, at Mabel's Labels, we used, we had shareholder hats, we had leader manager hats, we had hats of, researchers and dreamers and people who were imagining things up. And it was really helpful to, here I am as a shareholder, here's my board hat. And especially as we got to selling, it was helpful to think that way because, it wasn't at that point really about what we personally wanted. It was about what was best for the shareholder group. And so how could we put that hat on and really, yes, we had to consider the personal interests, but they weren't greater than the shareholder group. And so we had to think about those different hats. And it really did help us to understand, what should be discussed at the boardroom table? What should we discuss over a glass of wine at someone's house? And how we could sort of separate those things, because I think that letting go, and as you transition in leadership, there's a letting go, right? From doing to managing. And it can be emotional. It can be, and so if you can think about the hats, it just becomes like a practical exercise of, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't belong when I'm wearing this hat.
So I assume you're speaking from experience.
Yeah. Yes.
So what was kind of the emotional tenor for you, like moving from the doer to the manager and then also like the board?
Yeah.
speaking to the board?
Mhm. It was hard to let go. And I would say, when I started letting go in the beginning, like I would just like and the ball would drop and hit the floor, and sometimes it was glass and it would break open, because I was like handing stuff off to people without telling them how to do it or what I wanted. Or, it falls in this bucket of things you are never taught when you become a manager, is how to actually delegate. We all know we need to delegate. We're told to delegate, but we don't know how to do it in a way that gets us the result we wanted. And so I had to learn a lot about how to give out instructions, how to check in with people to make sure they stayed on track, how to ensure that we all understood what we were working towards. And I mean, the unfortunate reality for me was that I learned it all kind of the hard way. Nobody taught me much. And, sometimes you feel like you're like this airplane and you're flying along, and all of a sudden you realize the person you think is flying with you is doing like flying at another level. They're at 10,000 feet and you're at 25. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's like, you had no idea they misunderstood you in that kind of a way.
So if you were going to, like, how do you learn what you need to share and delegate, and how much of the vision do you pass on, and how much you
Yeah.
just kind of like hold an overview yourself?
So I think that they're sharing the overview and the vision is a really important part as the leader. And it's the leader's job to set that vision and to explain it and to rally the team behind the vision. Once you're kind of like everybody's excited, that's when you sort of get into the practical steps of the work. And so that's where building that plan backwards from the ultimate outcome becomes really important. And then, what is everybody's piece in that ultimate plan, and what do they need to deliver and when? And then it becomes about, if I have somebody that needs to deliver something to me in 2 weeks, that I don't say, okay, talk to you in 2 weeks, that because 2 weeks is probably a fairly big outcome, something substantial. It's not like going to take them an hour. And so how do I make sure that we don't get to 2 weeks and you're like, oh, that's not right?
Mm.
So what are the mini steps of, hey, why don't you go map this out and come back to me with your recommendations about how we should proceed, or with your plan of how we're going to proceed, depending on, how experienced they are. They may need you to help them create the plan. They may need to come to you to help decide on the plan, or they may need to come to you to just say, that's a great plan, go for it. But once you know the plan, then you know where you can check in with them to make sure they stay on track, and that, what you think is going to come back to you is what arrives, instead of being like, oh dear. And then your project is 2 weeks off pace. And then you've got to kind of try and figure out how to scramble a bit. And nobody likes that. And people who work for you, it's not engaging for them. They don't want to deliver something that isn't right. They want to hit the marks. There are exceptions, I know that, but really most people want to deliver. They want to hit the marks. They want to do the right thing. And so it's your job as a leader to assist them in delivering what they need to.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, what would you recommend to someone who is newly in a leadership position, or if they've been in it and they feel like they're not hitting the mark, and 2 weeks after 2 weeks, people are still not giving them what they want? What would you recommend they do? What do they
Well,
say?
yeah. Well, that's where you do need to have probably a harder conversation of, like, something's breaking down in our communication, because I feel like I'm being really clear and yet we can't seem to deliver what's needed. So let's figure out where the breakdown is. It could be that you think you're checking in at a level, but the communication's not enough, or you need to check in. You're not checking in at the right key points.
Mm.
And that's where using some kind of a template, like I have a template in my book for how you could go through the steps of checking in with somebody to make sure. So you could go as far as as something like that. It could also be that you just need to talk it out. Like, what is it that the person isn't understanding and why is there a breakdown? And I
Right.
think, it's about having those conversations and having the open communication is what will improve things and make it better. And then, I mean, sometimes you get to a point where the person doesn't have the skill set that maybe you need to do the job, and that's a different decision. But, before you get to that point, there should be lots of conversation about what do we need to do to get this on track? What's my part in that? And what's your part in that? Because I think the employee also has a part to play in that. They need to come and say, hey, here's where I'm at, and I'm not sure where I should go next. So how do you create the environment where someone feels comfortable coming to you with those questions?
Well,
And
that's a good question.
and I think it is having these open communication.
Yeah.
And,
So would
you
it be
know,
something like, let me know as if you have any questions, like before, rather than just go on blindly, just come back and ask me, because I don't know if I've been completely clear. Would it
yeah.
be something like that?
Yes, it would be something exactly like that. And then there could also be, I mean, I was an IT leader for a lot of time, and we would have daily, 10-minute daily stand-ups in the morning, and just join a call or join a actual physical room and talk about where the project was. And that would really, I would always go, even though I wasn't working on the project, because it would always give me the chance to say, wait a minute, something doesn't seem quite right there. Are you sure that we're on the right path? So it's figuring out, like, what are the structures that can help with that? And, when we would have an outage or a breakdown where our software didn't work or our website would go offline, we would often join together in our room, be it virtual or physical, until that troubleshooting was finished and we all knew what was happening. And it just helped people, like, some of it's just about giving confidence to the people that they have others who are there to support them. And so how do you find ways to make sure that people feel supported, not just by the leader, but also by their colleagues?
So what does that look like?
I think it looks like having those team meetings, having those check-ins, making sure that, when you have a check-in or in a meeting, that there's an agenda that you're following so that you're not missing things or wandering off in the conversation, that you really keep your eye on what are the important things to tackle and talk about.
Yeah. That kind of leads me into a question of like, how does one become a leader that people really love to follow?
Well, first of all, I'll go back to vision. I think that a leader, their job is really to create a vision that inspires. And, it's where, like, this expansive feeling, the word expansive comes into play when I think about it. You've got this expansive vision and people are like, oh, I want to be a part of that. Um, I think the leader has to be authentic. They need to show up in a way that feels real. And that doesn't mean that they know everything. It doesn't mean everything's perfect all the time. It doesn't mean there aren't going to be bumps in the road and problems. It's that the leader is very authentically saying, I don't know what we're doing here. We're in uncharted ground, but we're all going to work together. We're going to move this thing forward, and we're going to keep talking about how we get there. Or like we know where we're going, and like now we got to go fast, right? So, but it is that, authentic leadership where the leader expresses that, the timeline's really hard, or the work is a little bit unknown, or, all the different things. Like, to be honest and upfront about that pulls the team together to work towards the answers and the solution in terms of getting to where they need to get.
Yeah.
Um,
I just want to comment on the vision piece, because I noticed a year or so ago. So I have a couple of people who work for me, and with one of the people, I kind of, out of the blue, usually I just said, "Will you do this for me? Will you do this for me?" But this particular day, I decided I want to give her an update, and I said, "This is where I'm looking. This is what I'm looking at for the next 6 months." We're going to be redoing the website. I'm going to be launching this new program for overcoming the fear of speaking that's going to combine all of these things. That means we're going to need to do the new sales page, blah, 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 but it's not going to be all at once. I'm going to map it out. And she was so thrilled by me sharing that. I mean, I guess it was my vision that I was sharing that allowed her to feel more ownership, or like I'm part of something that is going somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about that as being important in, I mean, so I'm a solopreneur, I have a couple of people that I contract with, and it didn't occur to me that they would need or want something more than their to-do list. But hearing you speak, I realized, oh yeah, I need to keep them part of what I'm envisioning, because I'm envisioning all the time, but I'm keeping it to myself.
Yes. And I think it is that connectedness that makes people feel loyal and feel excited about following, the journey that you're about to take them on. So I think it is really important. And yeah, I think there's always times that we forget that, and I do, like, I think as a solopreneur, it's one of those times that it's easier to forget about those things. But yeah, important. It's important to connect people to that vision and to really bring them with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, another place, and again, I don't know like how relevant this is, but I sometimes will start a project, and like even today I was writing, I said, you know what, I'm not clear about this yet, so don't put any more work on it until I do a little more research.
Right.
And so I would think that, I mean, she did say to me recently, I really love working with you. And I'm thinking that it could be two things. One is that I really try not to have her on something that is not too fuzzy.
Yes.
Too fuzzy.
Very
and I'm
important.
not sure where I want to go, because, and she, I mean, relationships build, right? So like today she was saying, okay, I've got this going. I want you to take a look at it before I go further, just like what you were saying about. And I gave her directions, but then I also said, but let's hold off on this part. And the other thing that I like to do is I always tell her what I really appreciate. Everything that she does, I always say, I really appreciate you doing this part. I love how you did this. I want her to know what I think she's exceptional at.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And that's where it can come in too. Like, I really appreciate you doing this. Next time, could we tweak this a little bit, or could we prioritize it a little differently? Like, it also helps you when you need to give feedback because you want something done a little bit differently.
Absolutely. And what I like what you just said is, like, I never say, I don't like this. I always say, I love this, this. And then I say, this is what I'd like to do next.
Yeah.
Let's swap out this picture. Let's make this bold. Let's whatever. And it's always kind of like building upon.
Yeah.
Because I know when someone says, so I've been getting some coaching on posts or videos in the past. And I really dislike when they say, I don't like how you did this. This isn't how you should do it. You should do it this way. And all of a sudden I'm caught in, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I'm not so good. But when they just say, try doing it this way.
Right.
Then all of a sudden.
Yeah. And how do you make sure you're not caught in the, oh, like, is everything I've been, the I suck kind of like that, mentality about like, oh my God, everything I've been doing is wrong. And like the spiral of that too, right? Like, it is this, I think we can be kind, and sometimes we have to be very direct, but it doesn't have to be done in a mean way or an angry way or any of those kinds of things, right? We can still do it with kindness.
Yeah. And I think one of the tripping points is that we learn about giving feedback from our educational system, and our educational system is very punitive. And it's the red pen trauma that we all have. And yet we don't necessarily have a model for another way of doing it. And I think that's perhaps where some people kind of are misguided.
I think so. Yeah. 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 I think it is interesting, right? That punitive feeling. And I don't think that the punitive feeling goes with building high performance teams and the kind of leader that you need to be to get there. And, there's the like leadership pieces, and then there's the like core practical pieces of what people need to do as leaders to get there. But I don't think a team feeling like you're the red pen goes with micromanagement and all the other things. And it's really a sign that the leader we haven't developed our skills to the place where we need to, because like a team is, if you can't delegate, your team can never achieve the potential and outcomes that you dream of for them, because you're going to have retention problems with people. You're going to become the bottleneck of doing decision making, all the different parts that go with that. And so you've got to find a way to not be the bottleneck.
So have you seen this happen in people that you've coached?
Yeah, I think the natural inclination when you delegate somebody work and it doesn't go well is to, tighten the fist and close down on like, now I need to know every 5 minutes what's going on because this isn't working. But that actually is going to give you the outcome. The outcome's not going to improve from that kind of behavior. So you've got to really figure out, what are the rules of the game? What are the expectations? What are the steps that need to be taken? And how you get the person on the right path. I used to talk about with decision making, like my own experience with decision making is when, you take on a team, the decision making might not be where you need it to be. But you can't just say to people who haven't been empowered to make decisions before, you can't say, well, you decide, because they freeze and they don't make decisions. And then that causes a whole series of other problems. So you have to sort of sit down with them and say, okay, what are the options? Okay, like, what do you think about them? Good. I think we should make this decision. And then you need to take them to, okay, what are the options? What do you recommend? I think that's a good recommendation. Yes, let's make that decision. To the, here were the options. Here was my recommendation, and here's what I decided. And then we made the decision 3 days ago, right? Like you just can't tell people, well, just, you decide, when they haven't had that kind of authority before. So you also have to think as a leader about, how do I move people along a continuum to get them to that place I need them to be at? And what support do they need from me to get to that place?
Yeah, I'm also, oh, I see we have someone, Linda Leclerc said, I have to go, but she'll catch us later. That's great.
Awesome.
Thanks, Linda. Oh, I'm listening to the sound of your voice. And to me, that's part of our speaking confidence. So can you speak to that at all? Like, do you have any, I don't know, how do you help people develop that kind of confidence in the decision making and in navigating the decision making,
Yeah.
or the delegating, or the planning?
Well, I think it is that, like, I think as a leader, you have to think about, sometimes you need to be that out front leader. You need to be visible. You need to be making decisions, and you need to be, big, and it needs to look impressive. Sometimes, though, you need to be beside the people that you work with as their leader. You need to be stepping with them in time so that they can, look to you, you can look to them, and you can help them. Sometimes you need to stand behind your team and put them out front. And that's the kind of like, how do you as a leader change how you're showing up every day to support them in the way they need it that day?
Do you
You
have
know?
any stories of like what that looks like? You
Well,
know,
yeah, thinking about, like, I have not been typically in my career like the big out front leader. I like to let my team present things, so I'll work with them on the presentation. I'll rehearse the presentation. I'll set them up for the success, and I'll put them out there to, talk about the project or what they're working on, or whatever it was at that time. And, sometimes though, it's the joint piece of like, well, I'm not actually the expert on this. So, why don't you come and talk about this with me? Because I think it gives people opportunities and it allows them to develop their voice. And really, our job as leaders is to develop more leaders. Right. That's ultimately what I think we're all trying to do. And that is what I tried to do with my people. And at Mabel's Labels, we had a team of 40 people. We were over 40 people, but we, didn't have long career paths for people necessarily. And so I really started talking to my team about what was their next role, what did they want to do, and how we could get them there, because it probably wasn't going to be with us, especially like in my technology team. I had 10 people on my team. But, when someone got to a certain level and the next person in seniority was the director, they weren't going to go from the role they were in to the director role. They needed to go out into the world and get some experience. And for a long time, I never wanted to talk about that with people. And then, and then you just get crushed because one day they would quit, right? Because they needed to go get that job and they would go and get it. And finally, I started having the conversation of like, I've got a network, you've got a network. What's your next job? How are we going to get you there? What do you need to learn to land that job? And what's your timeline? And it really helped them. It helped me because I felt like when the door revolved and they had to leave, I knew I was going to send them out the door better than they came in it, which I wanted. And it helped me a little bit with planning because I knew, hey, in a year, this person's going to be ready for their next role. And so I'm going to need then to think about, is there a promotion within the team? Do I need to get somebody ready here? Am I going to need to hire? What does that kind of planning look like over the long term? And it really, I think it was a win-win for me as the leader, but it was a win for the people on my team too.
Mm. It's just such an interesting situation, I think, that we don't try to hold on to people and keep them in a place because it works for us, but that rather you are kind of in a generous spirit kind of way, looking at what is best, not just for you, but for them.
Yep.
And that you want them, you've put all this energy into, let's say, training or helping to cultivate their skills, but then the idea of sending them on their way it's kind of an interesting perspective. And I know I've heard it before, but it's still it's just as you say, rather than them feeling like, well, I'm going to quit because I've got to grow, that you take part in that,
Yeah.
and that's part of the mentorship of a leader.
Yes.
So interesting.
It was in our case because the company was growing and changing so much as well. There were times that we outgrew skill sets and needed to move people along as well. And those are all hard conversations. So it just, it was really about like the door, that revolving door. It's on a motor and it's just slowly going around. And at some point people are going to have to pop into it and go out, and some people are going to come in. And it just was sort of the nature of having a business at that size.
Yeah. And it sort of speaks to kind of like the idea of a resiliency of the
Yes.
business. Is there
Yes.
anything else that you want to say about like what goes into like a resilient mindset or uncertainty as a leader?
I think that it is about continuous bringing of skills, like looking at what do you need to learn? How are you going to do it? It's growth opportunity, right? Uncertainty is a growth opportunity for you, for your team. And so how do you make sure that you create the conditions to pull the team together to face it, not fragment them and have everybody sort of cowering in their own corner, right? I mean, I think
What do
that's
you mean by that?
well, I think that uncertainty is a time that can make people a bit fiery and whoa, and that's not going to cultivate the okay, things are looking unsure right now. How are we, what can I learn here? Not what happens if we're going to fail, but what are we going to go in and learn now? How do you bring the growth mindset, right? So that idea of this is a learning opportunity for all of us. We don't know what's going on. It's super uncertain. Let's go try and learn and grow. I think it's also, about at that point in uncertainty, what can we control? What can we make sure goes the way we want it to go? Let's make sure we do those things. Let's make a baseline. Where's our baseline of things that we can control? And then how do we keep this growth oriented perspective? How do we, keep emotionally kind of agile? We don't get caught in fear, easy to do. We don't get caught in our uncertainty about what we're doing. We figure out what we can do, what we don't know, and how are we going to try to get help from each other, from outside? Are there advisors? Are there experts? Are there people who can help us to navigate this? And just really thinking about solutions as opposed to, becoming very mired in our fear.
Yeah, yeah. So when do you recommend that somebody look outside, and where are the outside places that they can find?
I'm a big fan of looking outside probably almost always. I
Ah,
think that any leader should have a healthy mix of coach, mentors, advisors, an advisor slash consultant might be, as an interchangeable term. But I would look at those things as, mentors are people that you don't pay. They're people who you bring around you. Maybe you buy them dinner, lunch, coffee, and they give you their time and their advice. Advisors or consultants are people that you pay to come around your business with specific expertise to help you. And then a coach is somebody who really works with the leader one-on-one, or maybe you're a leader who can afford to bring a coach in for your team, your leadership team, because that can also be really beneficial. But I think it's about like a constant quest of self-improvement and of improvement, and the rising of all the boats of the team to do better and be better.
mhm. So I know you're a coach.
Yes.
What would you say a coach can do for a leader? What are the kinds of things that you help people with, or a coach would help people with?
I think a coach can really help people look at different perspectives of an issue or a problem or even an opportunity that they're examining. Like we all have our ways that we do things, and so the coach can kind of widen the lanes for you and let you see other possibilities. I think sometimes the coach is a great place to sort of dump your uncertainties and your I don't know where I'm going to go with this, and I need to get a plan together. And, it's a safe space as a leader. And it often feels like there aren't a lot of safe spaces, especially when you're struggling with a new challenge or a decision that you're having a hard time making. The coach can just really help you have that they're a sounding board, right?
Mm,
It's a sounding board, and somebody who can just really, lift you up for a different perspective on the problems that you're facing.
mhm. That's great. Well, I know that I rely on coaches myself, and as well as being a coach for people who are uncomfortable speaking somewhere. So yes, it sounds like it's the place where you bring any and all, and it's going to be different for every person because we all come into a position with a different set of skills
Yes.
and a sense of competence or confidence. So wherever it is that we're saying, I don't know how to handle this group dynamic. I don't know how to come up with a plan. I don't know how to respond to this email I got or this disgruntled,
Yep.
you know, relationship. And that you as a coach or someone else as a coach is going to be helping with
Yeah.
that. I think it's a great thing. I mean, because why struggle?
Why struggle? And I mean, sometimes you're struggling and then somebody says something to you like, what if it was easy? What if this was effortless? What would that be like? And you're like, oh, why does this have to be a struggle? Why am I struggling? Right? Like it's those little things where, and then you're like, okay, if this was easy, let's envision what it could look like.
Yeah.
What would that be like?
Yeah.
And
And
then
how about fun?
exactly. Because really, we should all be having fun. If it's not fun, I don't know why we're doing it.
Yeah, well, there are reasons. I mean, people need
There
to earn
are.
a living, and there are certain aspects of self-actualization and feeling your competence. But still, if you're miserable, it's a
Yes.
worth it.
There has to be, yes, it can't all be in service of one or the other, right?
Yeah.
There has to be a good blend of things where, yes, you do things in service of growth, you do things in service of fun, you find the right blend of, all the ways that you kind of come at it so that it doesn't feel heavy, but it can be heavy sometimes and you'll be okay.
Yes, and as you said, I loved what you said before that. It's when we're learning and we take it on as, okay, here's my growth opportunity,
Yes.
then it feels more motivating
It
to
does.
tackle the problem and saying, okay, I'm not going to shrink from this. I'm going to lean into it because I know that on the other side, I'm going to come out with all this experience and
Yes.
confidence.
And it's such a privilege to learn and to
Mm.
continue to learn and kind of taking that mindset of, okay, this isn't a problem. This is a learning opportunity. And like, I've got the privilege of figuring it out right now.
Oh, I love that. I love the privilege. Yes. That we're lucky to have this
Yes.
to be working on, that we get to do this.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you so much. Any other closing thoughts that you would want that we didn't cover that you really feel like if you're in a leadership position, I want you to do this?
I think just, keep navigating the trials, keep taking the wins, come out stronger. We will all be stronger. Leadership is not a destination, it is a practice. And it
Mm.
is something that we are all working on every day is to become better leaders.
Well, lovely. And where can people find out about you and your book and your podcast?
They can find me on my website at julieellis.ca.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Julie, thanks so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation. I feel kind of fired up
Yay.
and more kind of I don't know, raised up in my own leadership possibilities. And I look forward to just following you around and also listening to your podcast. So people go get her book, Big Gorgeous Goals, listen to her podcast, Figure Eight. I'm sure we all have something to learn from that. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Thanks, Linda.